But people in that courtroom thought they understood how power worked. They thought a badge always meant control, that a uniform always meant authority, and that no one would dare challenge it. They were wrong. Because on a cold morning in early spring, inside a packed courtroom in Columbus, Ohio, Officer Kyle Maddox made the single worst mistake of his career. He believed his badge gave him the right to humiliate anyone who questioned him, even the woman sitting quietly in the gallery. What he didn't realize was that the woman he slapped across the face was not just another bystander. She was Attorney General Maya Bennett, one of the most formidable legal minds in the state. And within seconds of that slap echoing through the courtroom, the officer who thought he ruled the room was lying unconscious on the floor, while hundreds of stunned witnesses watched history unfold. But the knockout itself was only the beginning, because that single moment of arrogance would trigger an investigation that exposed years of corruption, destroyed powerful careers, and proved that sometimes the fastest way to bring down a corrupt system is one mistake made in public. The air inside Courtroom 3B at the Franklin County Justice Center was thick with tension that Tuesday morning. The building smelled faintly of polished wood, old paper, and the bitter scent of stale coffee drifting from the hallway outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across the rows of benches filled with spectators, clerks, and a handful of reporters who had gathered for what most people assumed would be a routine hearing. At exactly 9:12 a.m., seated quietly in the second row of the gallery, was Maya Bennett. At 41, Maya carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years commanding courtrooms and negotiating political battles. But today she wasn't dressed like the Attorney General who regularly appeared on television. Instead of her usual sharp suits and official pin, she wore a dark gray coat and simple blouse, hoping to remain unnoticed. She wasn't there to make a statement. She was there for family. Sitting beside her was her nephew Darren Bennett, a 19-year-old engineering student whose leg bounced nervously as he stared toward the defense table. 3 nights earlier, Darren had been pulled over for what police claimed was an illegal lane change, but the encounter had quickly spiraled into something far more serious. According to the arrest report written by Officer Kyle Maddox, Darren had become aggressive and non-compliant, forcing the officer to remove him from the vehicle and charge him with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. But Darren insisted that wasn't what happened at all. He said Maddox had yanked him from the car before he even had time to ask why he'd been stopped. Maya believed him. She had reviewed the preliminary evidence herself, and something about the report didn't add up. "Just breathe," she whispered gently, resting a reassuring hand on Darren's knee. "Your lawyer has the video from the traffic camera. Truth has a way of showing up eventually." Across the room, leaning casually against the wooden barrier near the witness stand, stood the man responsible for Darren's arrest. Officer Kyle Maddox was hard to miss. At 6'3" with broad shoulders and a shaved military-style haircut, he projected the kind of presence that often intimidated people before he even spoke. He chewed gum slowly as he scanned the courtroom with an expression that suggested he had seen it all before and none of it impressed him. Maddox had spent 14 years on the Columbus police force, and while he had accumulated a surprising number of internal complaints during that time, not a single one had ever resulted in meaningful discipline. Among fellow officers he had earned a nickname, the Shield. Nothing seemed to stick to him. As the courtroom filled, Maddox's eyes drifted toward the gallery and locked with Maya's. For a moment neither of them looked away. Then Maddox gave a slow, arrogant smirk and winked, as if to say the outcome of the case was already decided. Maya felt a quiet wave of irritation rise in her chest, but she remained still. She had dealt with men like him before, men who believed their authority made them untouchable. Suddenly the courtroom door opened and the bailiff stepped forward. "All rise," he called loudly. Judge Harold Whitaker entered moments later, a tall gray-haired man whose reputation for efficiency meant hearings rarely lasted longer than necessary. He adjusted his glasses, shuffled through a stack of files, and quickly called the case. "State versus Darren Bennett," he announced. "Charge, resisting arrest." Darren's defense attorney, Lisa Navarro, stood immediately. "Your Honor, the defense is prepared to move for dismissal based on new video evidence." The prosecutor, a young assistant district attorney named Mark Dalton, looked surprised. "Video evidence?" he asked. "Yes," Navarro replied firmly. "Footage that contradicts the officer's report." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Officer Maddox straightened from the wall, the casual boredom disappearing from his face. That video doesn't show the full situation. He interrupted loudly before the judge had even acknowledged him. Judge Whitaker frowned slightly. Officer, you will wait until you're called to testify. But Maddox stepped forward anyway. All I'm saying is people edit things these days. They make officers look like villains. Maya shifted in her seat. Something about the tone in his voice, dismissive, irritated, almost threatening, rubbed her the wrong way. Navarro continued calmly. The footage shows Officer Maddox removing my client from the vehicle before issuing any verbal command. The tension in the room increased. Maddox scoffed. These people always twist the narrative. The words slipped out of his mouth carelessly, but they echoed loudly in the sudden silence that followed. Maya slowly stood. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but clear enough to carry across the room. "What exactly do you mean by these people?" Maddox turned toward the gallery, annoyance flashing across his face. When he recognized who had spoken, he raised his eyebrows with exaggerated surprise. "Well, look at that," he said with a mocking chuckle. "The Attorney General herself." A ripple of whispers moved through the spectators as heads turned toward Maya. She didn't flinch. "You're in a courtroom, officer," she replied evenly. "Perhaps you should speak more carefully." Maddox walked closer to the wooden railing separating him from the gallery, clearly ignoring the judge's growing irritation. "You think your title impresses me?" he sneered. "Out on the streets, that badge matters more than any political office." The room froze. Judge Whitaker raised his gavel. Officer Maddox stepped back. But Maddox was already leaning over the railing, his face inches from Maya's. "You want to challenge me?" he muttered angrily. Maya held his gaze without blinking. "I'm simply asking you to behave like a professional." That sentence, calm, controlled, and unmistakably firm, was the spark that ignited everything. Maddox's face flushed red with anger. Years of unchecked authority had taught him that most people backed down the moment he raised his voice. Maya Bennett didn't, and that refusal shattered his composure. Without warning, his arm shot forward. The sound of the slap cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. Gasps erupted as Maya's head snapped slightly to the side from the impact. For a moment, the entire room seemed suspended in shock. Maddox stood there breathing heavily, his expression filled with a strange mixture of triumph and disbelief, as if he himself hadn't fully expected to go that far. But the moment he lifted his hand again, intending to grab her coat and push the intimidation further, something changed. Maya slowly turned her face back toward him, the red mark forming on her cheek already visible under the harsh lights. Her eyes were steady, cold, focused. What Officer Kyle Maddox didn't know, and what no one in that courtroom could have guessed, was that before Maya Bennett ever stepped into politics, before she became Attorney General, she had spent years training in defensive combat while working with international security consultants overseas. She had been taught a simple rule that had saved her life more than once. Never escalate a conflict. But if someone else starts the fight, end it quickly. And as Maddox leaned forward again, reaching for her collar, Maya stepped toward him. The next 2 seconds would become one of the most replayed moments in courtroom history. But if anyone in that courtroom thought the chaos ended when Officer Kyle Maddox hit the floor, they were wrong. The moment his body crashed onto the polished wood, Courtroom 3B exploded into confusion. Bailiffs rushed forward, Darren shouted his aunt's name, and the quiet order of the hearing dissolved into stunned whispers. Maddox lay unconscious near the witness stand while Maya Bennett stood calmly where she was, breathing steadily with her hands slightly raised. The red mark from the slap was already visible on her cheek, but her voice remained controlled when she addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she said clearly. The officer initiated physical contact. "I defended myself." Judge Harold Whitaker looked stunned as deputies checked on Maddox and called for paramedics. Everyone in the room had seen what happened. The slap, the officer reaching for her collar, and the quick strike that dropped him. But something else was already unfolding outside the courtroom. In the back row, a student had been live streaming the hearing on his phone, and within minutes the clip began spreading across social media. By the time paramedics carried Maddox out on a stretcher, millions of people were already watching the moment an officer slapped the state's attorney general and was knocked out seconds later. Inside the ambulance, Maddox slowly regained consciousness, groaning as pain shot through his jaw. His partner, Officer Grant Miller sat beside him holding a phone showing the viral video replaying again and again. "What happened?" Maddox muttered. Miller sighed. "You got knocked out." The memory came rushing back. The slap, the courtroom gasping, the humiliation. Maddox stared at the screen as thousands of comments mocked him online. Rage burned through him stronger than the pain in his jaw. "Arrest her," he growled. "She assaulted an officer." Miller shook his head slowly. "Kyle, you hit her first." And the whole world saw it. Meanwhile, Maya Bennett had been escorted to a quiet room inside the courthouse while officials tried to figure out what to do next. Her attorney, Lisa Navarro, paced the room while checking news alerts on her phone. "It's everywhere," she said. "National news already picked it up." Maya pressed a cold bottle of water against her cheek. "Good," she said calmly. Navarro frowned. "Good." Maya nodded. "Because now nobody can pretend it didn't happen." For years she had worked inside the justice system long enough to know that incidents like this often disappeared into paperwork. But public evidence was harder to bury. And something about Officer Maddox's behavior bothered her. The arrogance, the way he ignored the judge, the certainty that he could act however he wanted without consequences. That kind of confidence usually meant protection. "Lisa," Maya said quietly, "I want everything on him." "You mean his record?" Navarro asked. "Everything," Maya replied. "Complaints, investigations, arrests, anything." By late afternoon, the first records appeared, and they were troubling. Officer Kyle Maddox had more than 20 misconduct complaints, including excessive force and missing property during arrests. Yet every investigation had quietly vanished without discipline. Someone had clearly been protecting him. That evening, Maya met with a cyber investigator named Adrian Park, who began digging through older police records. After several minutes, he turned his laptop toward her with a grim look. "Maddox used to work in a special enforcement unit about 10 years ago," Adrian said. "What happened to it?" Maya asked. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "It was shut down after a corruption scandal. Missing evidence, stolen money during raids. Several officers were investigated." Maya felt a chill run through her. "And Maddox?" Adrian tapped another key. "He was the only one who walked away untouched." Maya stared at the screen, her instincts sharpening. The slap in the courtroom suddenly felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Maddox hadn't acted like a man afraid of consequences. He had acted like someone who believed the system would protect him no matter what. Maya leaned back slowly, thinking through the pattern of complaints and unanswered questions. "If he's been getting away with this for years," she said quietly, "then someone higher up has been covering for him." Outside the office window, the city buzzed with the viral video of the courtroom fight. Millions of people were watching the moment an officer slapped the wrong person. But none of them realized yet that the slap had done more than knock out a cop. It had cracked open a door hiding years of corruption, and Maya Bennett had just decided she was going to kick that door wide open. The months that followed turned the courtroom incident into something far bigger than anyone expected. What started as a viral clip of an officer slapping the attorney general quickly evolved into a full federal investigation. The deeper investigators dug into Officer Kyle Maddox's history, the more disturbing the picture became. Old cases were reopened, missing evidence reports resurfaced, and several former suspects came forward claiming money and property had disappeared during their arrests. Eventually, the investigation led far beyond Maddox himself. It uncovered a network of officers and supervisors who had quietly protected him for years, allowing misconduct to continue without consequences. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Maddox eventually cooperated with federal authorities, revealing how members of the old enforcement unit had manipulated reports, skimmed seized cash, and intimidated anyone who threatened to expose them. The trial that followed brought the entire scheme into the light. Several officials were convicted, the corrupt unit was permanently dismantled, and long-ignored complaints were finally acknowledged. When the verdicts were announced, reporters crowded the courthouse steps waiting for Maya Bennett to speak. She stood calmly at the podium, the same composure she had shown the day everything began. "This was never about one slap," she told the crowd. "It was about accountability." The moment that had started as an act of arrogance in a courtroom ended up exposing years of corruption hidden behind authority. For many people watching across the country, the message was simple but powerful. No badge places someone above the law. And for Officer Kyle Maddox, The moment he raised his hand in anger became the moment his entire world collapsed.